The sales principle we're going to talk about today is he or she who asks the questions is in control. When you are in a prospecting call, particularly if it's cold, you feel often very rushed. You feel like I got to get this done right now, immediately, because they're going to hang up the phone and that's it and I'm done. But you are able to take control of that time by asking questions, particularly if they're back-to-back in a long sequence. So we're going to go over 3 different types of questioning strategies right now. And those are: what is a pattern interrupt? What is a reversing question? And then at what point does it make sense to jump in? Pattern interrupt, reversing question, jumping in. And I'll explain some of the different scenarios around those 3. And one of the best examples of a pattern interrupt, or like where I see that coming up, and I love this story, is if anyone has seen Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. Well, they have this back and forth they always do, where they decide, is it rabbit season or duck season? As in, what should the hunters go after? Should they go after the rabbit or the duck? And Bugs is the rabbit and Daffy Duck is the duck. And Daffy Duck will point the gun at Bugs and say, it's rabbit season. And then Bugs Bunny will move it over to Daffy Duck and say, it's duck season. And they go, rabbit season, duck season, rabbit season, duck season. And then Bugs Bunny goes, rabbit season, and continues to point it at himself. And then Daffy Duck takes it and goes, it's duck season. And then he gets blown up. What that shows and teaches kids is that you can really get into like a behavior loop where you're just kind of doing the motion, you're doing the next thing. And all of us have very pre-trained habits and responses. So if somebody calls us in a cold call, we all respond about the same way to most cold calls, or have certain behavior chains that we exhibit. What happens when buyers get nervous at the end of a buying cycle? They might just be asking question after question after question after question because they're nervous and don't really want to take the next step. So how can you change or reroute that behavior? And the way you would do that is a pattern interrupt. Specifically, what a pattern interrupt is it is some sort of action or behavior or topic that is very different from all the other topics you guys have been talking about. So if somebody tells you on the phone, I'm not interested, you probably don't want to go down that behavior chain. You don't want to be like, well, why aren't you interested? And they go, well, it's because of this. Well, would you be interested if I said this? No, I'd still not be interested. And you're stuck there. So when you have objections like I'm not interested, which we'll talk about in a minute in detail, how can you just move the conversation to a totally different spot? Usually the answer is that you need to inject new, interesting information into the scenario, right? Things like, most people have no idea that coaching your team can be done remotely. Most people have no idea. Most people have no idea that you can know every single thing that your reps are saying on the phone. With that said, do you mind if I ask you just 3 questions to see if this is something that could help your team out? Right? That's a total shift. You're not getting into the, hey, I understand you're not interested, but what if I did this? Well, I understand, like, you don't want to get into that behavior loop. Change it, shift it, have a different conversation, right? So that is the first principle is, or the first technique is, when a conversation feels cyclical, like you feel like you're stuck, move it, have a new conversation, have a pattern interrupt, change the topic. The second principle that we're going to talk about is a reversing question. Specifically with reversing questions, the idea behind it is 2 things. One is that we often talk past each other, and someone will tell you some bit of information. You go, yeah, I know what they mean. And you just take the assumption and run. So someone says, hey, now is really not a good time. And you might go, oh yeah, of course it's a bad time. The coronavirus makes it an awful time. And they go, no, 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 I'm actually, my daughter is in the other room crying, and that's not really a good time. So I probably should go back. So the idea behind that is that you don't necessarily know what exactly the other person means unless you ask them to expand or clarify. So there are a lot of times where it's easy to take people on the assumption that what you thought you heard is what you really heard. But it's good to use techniques like active listening and like reversing questions to be like, okay, actually, you said that the pricing doesn't make sense. What do you mean? Right? Things that get them to expand or clarify. So that's the first. The second is every salesperson has felt that phenomenon of being drilled by your customer, of having someone ask another question, another question, another question, and they're kind of on the attack mode, right? And part of that is just human behavior and how people tend to work together sometimes. Another part of it is the habit or the momentum. And then another part is probably actually wanting the information that they're looking for. But there are times where customers asking you question after question really is not productive for your conversation. And I think the example that might come to mind for a lot of us is technical conversations, where for customer success and for sales, a lot of times the technical questions aren't relevant because they don't have enough context about how the system works. So they might say, well, what is your audio stream API in order to grab the audio streams? And it's like, no, it's totally different. Or, okay, well, with your AI, are you using like a Kubernetes kind of approach? It's like, no, it's totally different. Totally different. So one of the ways that you can take control of that conversation again is by pausing and asking them a question, because now you're able to flip that momentum and you can ask follow-ups and you can get down to the business objective that you're trying to get to. So that's the other purpose of a reversing question. It works particularly well in the prospecting side when people offer some sort of vague or very big statement, right? So when people say this isn't the sort of thing we'd be interested in. What is this sort of thing? You don't want to say it like that, but what do they mean? You just put me in a bucket with all the other things, and you have an understanding that this isn't the sort of thing you're interested in. Well, what sort of thing do you think we are? Why is that? Is it that you guys have had a lot of conversations about this sort of thing and it never works? Are you guessing? Is that your perspective? Is that the entire team's perspective? Is it the company's perspective? Is it not a priority? What do you mean? So whenever you notice a loaded word like that or a loaded phrase, really, really good opportunity to answer with a question or reply with a question. The third technique that we'll go over today is jumping in. We used to have a rule on the SDR team at Top Ops, and I loved this rule. It was one of the best pieces of coaching that I ever had, and it's that you need 3 no's before you hang up the phone. Because by the way, after 3 no's, it can get annoying, and you kind of have to recognize that we need to be listening and be thoughtful and balance pushing with also stepping back. But I think you would be surprised at how patient people will be if you show that you care and if you are taking the time to articulate your thoughts effectively. So that third technique, jumping in, is what we want to do when someone is on the way to hang up. And right after they finish their sentence, or maybe the last word or so of their sentence, that's where you want to jump in very quickly, because you can save that call and it will make a legitimate difference in your conversion rates. So let's review before we go into some activities. We talked about He or she who asks the questions controls the conversation. And we mentioned 3 types of questions. One was a pattern interrupt, where when things are not going down the right track, something to totally change the conversation so you're not stuck with bad momentum. The second is a reversing question, which will allow you to get clarification or understanding what the other person wanted, or also take back control of the conversation if you're getting a lot of questions from your prospect. And then the third is jumping in, where you can quickly jump in with the question in order to make sure that the conversation doesn't go to the garbage bin. Cool, everybody. Thank you again. Let me know if you have any questions. This was great, and have a good night.